what if your tax bill wasn't based on where you live, but on the passport you carry? For most people in the world, that idea sounds pretty strange. Well, for millions of Americans living abroad, that's their reality, and it's a complicated and frustrating one. So today, we're going to dig into a brand new bill that could finally change everything. So, just how unusual is this system? Turns out, the US is one of only 2 countries in the entire world that taxes its citizens no matter where they live. And the other one? Eritrea. That puts the United States in a very, very exclusive club. And look, this isn't just some small quirk in the tax code. We're talking about a massive departure from how basically every other country does things. And we're not talking about a small group of people here. This affects a staggering 5.5 million Americans. You know, entrepreneurs in Berlin, teachers in Tokyo, artists in Paris, they're all caught in this super complicated tax web, not because of where they work, but just because of the passport they happen to hold. All right, so to really get our heads around this, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll break down the rule itself. Then, we'll get into the real-world headaches it causes. After that, we'll dive into the big new proposal, see exactly how this bill would work, and finally, take a look at the political hurdles it's facing. Okay, let's kick things off at square one. To really see why this is such a big deal, you've got to understand the core idea behind the whole system. So here's the deal. It's called citizenship-based taxation. Basically, it means that if you're an American citizen living and working in, let's say, London, you're paying taxes to the UK, right? Well, you also have to file and potentially pay taxes to the IRS on that exact same income. Your passport, not your address, is what triggers your US tax bill. Okay, so that's the theory, but what does this actually feel like for people on the ground? Let's talk about the real-world consequences, what many call the expat burden. And get this isn't some angry blogger or an activist we're quoting. This comes directly from a former IRS commissioner, a guy named Charles P. Rettig. He's basically saying that even if you don't owe a single penny in U.S. tax, just the process of filing is a nightmare. It costs a ton of anxiety, time, and yeah, cold hard cash for accountants year after year. And then, as if things weren't complicated enough, along comes 2010. A new law called FATCA gets passed. Now, the idea behind it was good. It was meant to catch super rich people hiding money offshore. But it had this huge unintended side effect. It pretty much turned every single American living abroad into a giant headache for their local bank. And the results were, well, they were immediate and pretty awful. See, foreign banks were terrified of the massive penalties from the US government. So a lot of them just said, you know what, it's easier if we just don't deal with Americans, period. And just like that, you had US citizens getting locked out of the most basic financial services. They couldn't open a savings account, get a mortgage, or even be approved for life insurance. So you can imagine this whole mess has been fueling a push for change for decades. And that brings us to the big idea on the table, a switch to residence-based taxation, and the new bill that's trying to make it happen. You know, this isn't a new fight. People have been pushing for this for almost 50 years. But something has really started to shift lately. After a bunch of bills went nowhere, the issue got a major shot in the arm in late 2024 when Donald Trump pledged to end this double taxation. And that political momentum, it led directly to a brand new, really comprehensive bill being introduced just a couple of months later. And that bill is H.R. 1468, officially called the Residence-Based Taxation for Americans Abroad Act. Now, we need to be clear, this isn't just some minor adjustment. People are calling this the biggest, most comprehensive overhaul of the system ever proposed. It's designed to completely change the game for Americans living overseas. Okay, so what's actually in this thing? Let's pop the hood on this bill and see how it would all work. It basically breaks down into a 4-step process. First, you'd have to choose, or elect, to be treated as a non-resident for tax purposes. To do that, you'd have to prove you've been a good taxpayer for the last 5 years. Then there's the part that gets a lot of attention, a one-time departure tax for really wealthy people. And don't worry, we'll talk more about that in just a second. And if you do all that, from then on, you'd only pay U.S. taxes on income you make from U.S. sources. Simple as that. Right, so that departure tax, it sounds kind of scary, doesn't it? It's probably the #1 question people ask about this whole thing. So, is this something most people are going to have to worry about? The short answer, absolutely not. This really breaks it down. The whole point of this one-time tax is to stop the super, super wealthy from using this new rule to just skip out on paying taxes on all their assets. It only applies to people with a net worth of more than, wait for it, about $14 million. So for the vast, vast majority of Americans abroad, this tax is a non-issue. And this is a really clever fix for that whole banking nightmare we talked about. It's called a certificate of non-residency. Think of it like a hall pass from the IRS. It's an official piece of paper you can take to your bank in another country to prove, hey, I'm exempt from all that crazy FATCA reporting. And this one simple document could be, as that former IRS commissioner put it, literally life-changing, because it would finally reopen the doors to banking for so many people. Okay, so we've got a really clear problem and what looks like a pretty well-thought-out solution. But this is Washington, D.C. we're talking about, and a good idea is often just the beginning. So for our last section, let's look at the bill's uncertain future, the politics and the roadblocks that stand in its way. Look, getting any bill passed is hard, but a tax bill? That's a whole other level. So the people pushing for this are basically playing a game of legislative chess. They're trying to find a way to attach this proposal to something else that has to pass. Like a government funding bill or a bigger tax package, maybe a bipartisan deal at the end of the year, or hey, even immigration legislation. It's all about finding the right train to hitch this car to, just to get it across the finish line. Anyway, just to be totally clear, it's really important to talk about what this bill doesn't do. It's a huge deal for income tax, for the FATCA headaches, and for getting a bank account, for sure. But it doesn't touch the U.S. gift and estate taxes. Those would still apply to Americans no matter where they live. It also doesn't say anything about green card holders abroad. And the thinking here was probably to keep the bill as simple and focused as possible, to give it a better shot at actually passing. And so after all of that, it really all comes down to one big question. The same question that's been at the heart of this whole debate for decades. It's a question about fairness, about common sense, and really what it means to be an American citizen in today's world. When it comes to your tax bill, what should matter more, your passport or your address?